Hi, I'm Al Beck. I'm the Director of Psychology and Psychotherapy for SLAM. Welcome to this broadcast on psychological resilience building. And if you've joined these broadcasts before, you'll know that the theme of these broadcasts is about how we can prevent the development of mental health problems and support people in local communities. And as you know, most of the work that goes on in terms of preventing the development of mental health problems and indeed supporting people who have them already takes place outside of secondary mental health care. And in these series of broadcasts, we're really exploring the ways in which we can augment and develop that. Today we have the Oasis team who are going to talk to us about working with people with unusual experiences before they become psychotic, and how we work as psychologists and psychotherapists to help people to deal with the stress that they experience differently. So in this series, we are working, we'll also be profiling the work of a huge number of third sector providers and other statutory providers who do absolutely fantastic work. That's not particularly the case in this broadcast, but we would still like your thoughts and comments in the chat function. This broadcast will go on for 30 minutes, so please get in early with your questions, but also please feel free to reply to questions that get asked, link people together, set up meetings and get under some of those difficult questions that we need to answer if we're going to make sure that we can address the health and social inequalities that we are seeing at the moment, which mean that we have at the moment an overrepresentation of Black people in secondary care services and in the most restrictive parts of our services. So we all know we need to do something about that, and I think that the Oasis team are going to give you some really useful insight into thinking about how we can start to address that work early on. So I'm going to begin by asking the team to introduce themselves, and we'll take it from there. So Sana, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Sunil Nanda. I'm a consultant psychologist. I work in Lambeth Early Intervention Services, and a part of that is my work in Oasis.
Thanks. And Larissa?
Yes, I'm Larissa Henderson. I'm actually an ex-service user who is currently working with Oasis now to reach the community.
So that's great. It's great that you're both here, and you know we're in the holiday season, so this is a hard time to be doing a broadcast. But can you tell us a little bit about what Oasis is, Sunil?
So Oasis is a community mental health team for people aged 14 to 35 who might meet criteria as being at risk for developing psychosis. That can mean a number of things, but typically people might be experiencing something like hearing voices or feeling suspicious or paranoid, but in a way that doesn't meet criteria for an episode of psychosis. We work with people for a 2-year period, and we know that our approaches can be effective in helping people to prevent the onset of an episode of psychosis. Part of our work is to reach out into local communities and try to promote help seeking among people who might be struggling and might often be scared of accessing support. We're aware that as statutory services, we have had historically and currently issues and problems in terms of our relationships with our local communities, and some areas of our provision have a fairly checkered history, and that's something that we find ourselves working against. But on the ground, we find that it can make it difficult for young people to have confidence in reaching out for support. We've tried to do various things in mitigating some of that. One of the things that we've done with the support of Larissa and others is to develop a website with the intention of that, meandmymind.nhs.uk, being to circumvent the usual pathways to care. So we have the possibility of self-referral, and to try and promote and to disseminate good quality, destigmatizing information about unusual experiences, and to make self-help materials available online as well. Part of that work is also to engage directly with people who hold influence in the community, maybe who have leadership or pastoral roles, and as well as in trying to communicate with more nuance maybe, psychological and even medical at times ways of understanding unusual experiences, we're keen as well to learn more about the spiritual, cultural, social ways of making sense, so that ultimately we can create spaces where people can feel more safe in accessing support.
Larissa, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your experiences of this service. Can you, how did you come to the service? What was your experience of it? What are its strengths, its weaknesses?
So I was referred to Oasis for 2 years, a few years ago now. I was having unusual experiences. I took a trip to the A&E and then was referred on to Oasis. When I was first told about Oasis, all I heard, to be honest with you, was Maudsley, South London and Maudsley, and straight away I thought, no, it's not for me. Because within the community, once you hear Maudsley, you kind of just think it's a mental health hospital. You know, like, I've known of people that have gone there and they've not come out the same. You just assume they're going to kind of pump you with medication and just let you get on with it, really. So at first I was a bit hesitant. I didn't really want to kind of get involved. But I did give it some thinking. Sunil reached out to me as well as some others from the team. And I felt comfortable enough to attend a meeting. And once I attended, I realised the kind of support that I would receive. So I originally sat with Sunil. We had kind of one-to-one sessions, spoke about my experiences and what I wanted from working with Oasis and what I felt I needed. So it kind of allowed me to look at South London and Maudsley and the Oasis team differently to the idea I had about them previously. At first, the kind of process was pretty easy, if I'm honest. It's kind of meeting the team, everyone kind of introduced themselves, and I found that it was very much on my terms. So if I wasn't able to attend, if I didn't feel up to attending, I could, once I made that clear, everyone kind of worked around me. So yeah, that was kind of my experience with Oasis in the beginning.
And I wonder, Larissa, can you tell us a little bit more about your what you think the kind of barriers people might have to accessing services like this? What does Oasis need to do to win people's confidence? What do secondary mental health services need to do differently?
I think there are a lot of barriers, especially, as I said, just the name Maudsley within the community is not a positive. It doesn't kind of bring a positive feeling. I think especially amongst the Black community, we are not very trusting of mental health kind of associates or doctors or anything. We're not very trusting of it. We've kind of been taught that what happens, we kind of keep within we keep amongst ourselves. We kind of don't trust the fact that medication is kind of thrown at you. We're kind of taught that we stay away from things like medication. So that's a big barrier. I mean, when I joined Oasis, it was something that I spoke to one of the GPs about, kind of medication and not really wanting to take medication, because within my community, it wasn't something that's deemed as positive. So I think that's a really big factor. And I think it's teams like Oasis understanding that people have these ideas before actually attending, and kind of have these, not misconceptions, but things that they've been taught from their community, especially the Black community for me. And I think in order to kind of build bridges and for the community to trust, it's kind of taken away the stigmas around mental health communities. The teams, it's taken away the stigma that you're just going to throw medication at someone and then just leave them to it. It's actually letting people know what you guys do. I think that's really important for the community to know. Because me, for example, going through the process, I've been able to speak to people within my circle about the process I went through, the one-to-ones, the support I got, which has allowed my friends to reach out to different teams where they're from. So at first people are very hesitant, but once someone like me has kind of gone through it and I can explain that actually it's not what we think, people are then more trusting. And I think it's important, like with what we're having now, that people like myself do speak up, because obviously we've been through the process, we are part of the community, and it's letting people know that it's not what they think, and that you can kind of put a little bit of trust into mental health kind of associates and stuff.
Oh, thanks, Larissa. Sunil, I was just wondering, listening to what Larissa's saying, do you think that mental health services are where they need to be, that it's just a matter of winning the trust of local communities? And if so, how are you going to go about that? How do we go about that? Or do you think there's some stuff we need to do to change to make ourselves more acceptable, and maybe do things differently, maybe work through other types of provider or with other types of provider, and recognise the sort of, I guess, plethora of different ways in which people connect with each other? You kind of hinted at that in your introduction.
Yeah, I think there are pockets of what we do that we do really, really well, and I think hearing Larissa's experiences is just so powerful. But my sense overall is that the negative narratives within our local communities are based on real experiences that people have had, and there's an enormous amount of truth in that, and in order to rack up a sort of commensurate number of positive experiences to change those narratives, it's going to take an enormous amount more work, and probably some real changes in the way that we do operate. I think ultimately what we need to strive to do is to encourage people to feel confident that they can access statutory services without giving up anything of the person that they already are, their own frames of reference, their cultural, spiritual beliefs and ways of understanding, and that we as services are willing to mould around the people who we're looking to offer support to. I think an aspect of doing that is an ongoing process of consultation and co-production with people within our communities, because there are some things from a psychological and medical perspective that we do really well, but there are gaps in our understanding as well, really significant gaps in terms of how in terms of the range of different ways that experiences associated with psychosis or psychosis risk might be understood, and the meaning that different groups of people might bring to them. And I think that what we'd ultimately like to do going forward is to have this as initial conversation that maybe is a prompt for many others, where we might be able to share some of those perspectives, communicate a more helpful version of what we're trying to do, but also be really open to the expertise that lies within communities. And Al, to your point as well, I think probably the days of statutory services feeling quite separate and divorced from community settings, it feels like that does feel like a quite traditional, old-fashioned way of working, and we need to have a more embedded presence in the communities that we serve.
So thanks, Sunil. I've just asked the audience if they know of any organisations who could or should be working with Oasis, and I'm sure that you already have a number that you're working with. Can you tell us a little bit about, some of the challenges or next steps for you? It's something about who's using your services, who maybe isn't, who do you need to reach, but also I'm really interested in what you just said about co-production, about maybe needing to change, adapt, work in different ways in order to, I guess, find a better fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of groups that we're looking to reach out to most proactively, I think the best way of getting a sense of that is looking at our current caseloads and over the last couple of years, and thinking how the makeup of those caseloads differs from people who are accessing acute support. So remembering we're a preventative service. Now, if we look at first episode psychosis services, there's as you mentioned, a huge overrepresentation, particularly people from Black African and Black Caribbean backgrounds. Us as a preventative service, the proportion of people from those backgrounds on our caseloads are about commensurate with what they should be in the local population. But that means there's an underrepresentation of people who are actually going on from those communities to develop a serious mental health problem like psychosis. So in particular, we understand that there are significant barriers to access for young black men who are more likely to end up having contact with mental health services at the more acute end, where it's much less likely that they'll experience themselves as having a choice over the treatment they receive, and feeling like they have a genuine say over the course of their, at least their initial contact with services.
So you're absolutely right. At the moment, you know, we have an overrepresentation, of course, of black people, and in psychiatric services, in our most restrictive parts of those services, we of course would want to keep them out. Now, so I'm just reflecting back a question from the audience here about which community groups you currently link with, and you know, I guess what you see as being the next steps in terms of who you'd like to reach with. So maybe the audience already know of some groups. This is maybe an opportunity to find out. So who are you currently working with? So
our community engagement program realistically has been fairly ad hoc over the last 2 or 3 years. So we reach out to different faith organizations, colleges, universities, different areas where people might be in mentorship or leadership roles, but it's tended to be relatively piecemeal, really, rather than working in a concerted, ongoing way with community organizations. To an extent, I think that's probably been a product of the more public healthy aspect of our work, being in addition to the sort of busy clinical roles that most staff have. But really, we'd be looking to do we'd be looking to create partnerships in a different way, where there is more genuine co-production rather than slightly more surface level consultation, I'd say. And one way, as I sort of touched on briefly before, is if forums like this can be an ongoing way that we work to bring together people from different areas of the community and people who are working with unusual experiences, to have a group of people who are committed to thinking in a different way about how do we understand and manage and support people with unusual experiences, whether that be in statutory settings or whether that be in more community settings.
So that's great. So something much more systematic, I think, is what you're looking for, and much more co-produced. We've had a number of questions from the audience that are quite specific, and I think you can get back to those individuals afterwards. And I would say to people, please leave contact details if you want your questions answered specifically by either Sunil or Larissa. But a big question here, and I was wondering, Larissa, if it could be for you, about whether, you know, co-production with communities might reflect sort of Indigenous ways of healing, if you imagine what I mean, ways of healing that communities already rely on and know work, and to what extent you think that anything that you feel that there's anything that could be brought into secondary mental health care in general, or Oasis specifically, to learn from those, you know, Indigenous healing processes, if you see what I mean.
I think what Sunil said was really important, kind of getting to know the community and how they feel. I think the healing process, it's a difficult one. Like Sunil said, a lot of the stigmas around Maudsley, it comes from the truth. It's not things that are kind of made up. So just like we said, I think continuing these conversations and allowing people to speak up, to be heard, is really important. Yeah, I think the kind of changes that Oasis, or in general, kind of mental health teams can make is, like I said, reaching the community in a different way to what they're doing now. I think when Sunil spoke earlier about kind of pastoral roles within the community, and I think we have to realise that a lot of people within the community that experience mental health issues, they tend to go to particular people first before they get to the point of Oasis or any kind of hospitalization or anything. For me personally, it was my pastor. So kind of people in those kind of roles are the people that you kind of reach out to first. So I think it's understanding as well who from the community can help reach out to a wider community in terms of mental health and stuff. And I think the healing process comes from that. I think the healing process comes from reaching out to people that we already trust, making sure that people are heard. And I think those are the kind of changes which I think Oasis in particular are kind of going down that path. But those are the changes that can be made. Like I said, just people want to be heard, and not, you know, the whole idea, as I've said before, around kind of mental health is just throwing medication at someone and that's it. But people, as you said with Oasis, it's for people that haven't really got to that point of hospitalization. It's what you're trying to avoid. So it's speaking up earlier on, being heard, and speaking to people in the community that are actually in contact with people like myself already.
So your big message, I think, is know your communities, know who people turn to, and I think, you know, systematically understand and engage with that, because that's the start. The start isn't the point at which people are referred to you. The starting point is the point at which you know your local communities, you're co-producing solutions with them, you're building on the healing processes that they already have in place, and you're using those trusted relationships to see what part where you can add value. Do you see that changing your practice in any way, Sunil?
I have to say, I might be fortunate in terms of the teams I work in, but I'd say I really do. And I think historically maybe we've known our evidence and our specific methods of working pretty well, and our communities much less so. But what I sense kind of day to day is that there's a feeling that this work can't really meaningfully progress without us being much more in touch with what people in our local communities are asking for and need. Because ultimately, if we're not able to reach people to provide the interventions that we believe can be helpful and successful, then that's an enormous problem. And I do feel that you know, enough and many people are looking to work in a slightly different way. And I think, you know, to think about things slightly from the other side as well, I think generally within communities and the understanding of mental health and recognition that people's mental health will be affected by the types of stresses that large parts of our communities are under is also increasing. But I think the bit that makes it difficult to join those two parts up is that young people, particularly at points where they're struggling, continue to have a fear, quite understandably, about what the consequences of seeking support might be. And it's our duty to create a sense that they can do so safely, and they will be respected, and that they will have as much choice as is possible in the form their treatment takes.
And one of the most frightening ways in which people come into mental health services is through the criminal justice system, or through either being picked up by the police or being brought in under perhaps a section or even a criminal section. So how much do you work with the youth justice system? How much do you work with the police? How do you see that as being an opportunity? What changes do you think need to happen in that relationship in order to engage the trusted relationships with local communities? Sunil, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, we work, there's a natural intersection, unfortunately, of the criminal justice system and the mental health system. But outside of the ways in which you've described, Al, that people might be brought in through those routes to access mental health services, it's not something that we've really done as a service. I'm not aware of lots of other services who've done so either, to have to look to build a different type of relationship and consultation with police services in the criminal justice system. Part of our, well, I guess there are some reservations that we have about aligning ourselves too closely with the police, and I think that there are, and this is something that people I've worked with have told me before, that they often see statutory mental health services in much the same way as they might see the police service, that ultimately it represents a threat to their freedom and their well-being and that of their family. So I think if there are important ways in which organisations like ourselves and the criminal justice system can work together, that is bound to be a good thing, but with the intention, I guess, of that same thing of how can we create a greater sense of safety for people in our communities in terms of their experience of policing and their experiences of seeking support around mental health. I'd imagine that the two organisations have faced lots of similar problems.
And maybe similar criticisms of institutional racism, criticisms of, poor engagement and poor understanding of the communities they serve. Larissa, I'd be interested in your views.
A lot of what Sanil said, I agree with. As I keep saying, trust is such a big deal. And I think, especially within the Black community, trust amongst the police is not, there isn't much trust there. So, and I do agree, Sanil. I think it's the same kind of idea around mental health, hospitals and communities and stuff. The trust, it is the same. I think it's seeing kind of the police or people in positions like yourself as these people in white suits that are really far away from us and don't want any good for us. It's just not a positive feeling that we get from either. So I think, like you said, I think working together can always be a good thing. But it's also understanding that the community, there might be a lot of friction at first from the community, if that is the case, and that trust just needs to be built. And I think people just need to have the understanding that something like a team like Oasis is there not to take their freedom away. Like you said, it's for them to be as involved as possible within the whole processes and stuff. So yeah, I think it's just off of what Sanil said, it's really important to understand kind of how the community need to trust these people. And yeah, just not people thinking that their freedom, they have no freedom. I think that's really important.
So we've just got a couple of minutes now, so I'm just going to ask you both, based on what we've talked about the need for change, about the need to engage communities in a completely different, perhaps much more systematic way, need to really understand communities, work with community groups differently, but also to work with different agencies and to maybe have influence over those different agencies. And some of the probably very correct criticism of agencies such as ours, of being, institutionally racist, of being, of having ways of working that are inevitably self-limiting. What do you think are the next steps for building trust? I'm going to start with you, Larissa, and then end with you, Sanil.
I think
what's the next step?
Yeah, I think it's like what we said before. The next steps are letting the community know that teams like Oasis are there for the support, to support them. I think it's making your work known amongst the community, exactly what you guys do, and getting away from the stigma of Maudsley, South London and Maudsley. I think it's building trust, especially amongst the Black community. I feel like everything at the moment is kind of going through a shift. A lot with, the kind of Black Lives Matter movements and stuff, and institutions are going through a shift, and I think that needs to continue to happen. So these kind of conversations need to continue to happen in order to kind of build trust amongst the community, and especially the kind of BAME community. So I think trust always has to be at the forefront. And in order to gain that trust is just getting to know your community, like we said, and just constantly engaging, and not being a part of the community, not kind of just amongst us and not really a part of us, but just being a part of us, so that you understand where we're at, how to kind of reach us, and yeah, just kind of take it from there.
Brilliant. And one sentence, Sonil, to sum us up. What's the next thing you're going to do?
Well, I guess given that we've hopefully had many people join us today who kind of have a stake in some of this and maybe are in a position to influence things, I guess the next thing is I'd be really keen to hear from people who've heard us have this conversation today and are interested in further conversations, further meetings like this, maybe workshops, ways in which people from statutory services and people from communities can come together, share perspectives, and also try and address some of these endemic problems that we faced.
So thank you guys so much. Larissa, absolutely fantastic. Sonil, thank you so much for introducing your service. That's the end today.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.